the dark hours before dawn on August 15, 1945, the Second World War is almost at its final breath. High above the Pacific, Lieutenant Howard "Howdy" Harrison leads 6 F-6F Hellcats toward the skies around Tokyo. Their mission is a fighter sweep, and their destination is at Sugi Airfield, a place still guarded by Japanese fighters. Down below, enemy pilots are waiting, tense and alert, ready to rise into the sky the moment the Americans appear. Then, through the haze ahead, Harrison catches sight of the field, and the shape of the runway begins to sharpen. "Target in sight," he calls out, telling his men to arm their Havar rockets and prepare for the strike. Inside the Hellcats, switches are flipped, weapons are made ready, and the formation tips down toward the target. Harrison drops his nose, starts his dive, and feels the airframe gather speed as the ground grows larger beneath him. His thumb hovers close to the pickle button, the instant of release, now only a breath away. Then, at the very edge of attack, a voice breaks across the radio with an order no one expected to hear. "Return to base immediately. The war is over. I repeat, the war is over." For a heartbeat, there is silence. Then the radio comes alive with shouting, laughter, and disbelief. The Hellcats pull away from the airfield, abandoning the attack just as it is about to begin. Some pilots throw their fighters into victory rolls. Others loop through the sky, overcome by the weight of the moment. After years of fear, fatigue, and death, the message sounds almost impossible, yet it is real. The Americans turn for home, carrying with them the first wild taste of survival and peace. But behind them, the Japanese fighters do not see celebration in the same way. Lieutenant Utaka Moroka of the Japanese Navy watches the Hellcats twisting and rolling in the distance. A cold feeling moves through him as he begins to understand what those maneuvers must mean. Japan has surrendered. The thought lands with such force that for a moment he cannot accept it. Then the confirmation reaches him by radio, and the truth can no longer be pushed away. His country, in his mind, has been humiliated, and the defeat cuts deeper than any wound. Moroka feels the memory and pain in the hand he lost while fighting American bombers. Nearby, some Army pilots obey the order to return to base, accepting that the fighting is supposed to end. But Moroka sees the Americans turning away, alive, triumphant, and unreachable if he lets them go. To him, this is not just another encounter in the sky. It is the last possible chance to answer shame with action. So he makes his choice. Moroka pushes his fighter into a dive, and his Navy group follows him down. Other Japanese Army fighters join the attack, and in seconds, the pursuit becomes a carefully formed ambush. They drop from above like a hidden blade, fast, silent, and deadly, closing on men who believe the war is finished. Then the warning comes through the American formation. Tally-ho, many at 6 o'clock high, diving. Harrison snaps his head over his shoulder, and the celebration drains from the cockpit. "All of you dump your tanks and rockets," he orders, "and break the damn ceasefire." The Japanese are coming in with a height advantage of 4,000 feet, and Harrison has no time to waste. He drives the throttle forward, brings his squadron around, and leads the Hellcats into a steep climb. The Japanese fighters carry heavy 20mm cannons, weapons that can tear an aircraft apart in moments. But Harrison knows something else too. The Japanese planes are lightly protected, almost fragile if caught cleanly. If the Hellcats can fill the sky with fire from their 650 caliber guns, they may still survive this. The two formations rush toward each other, closing the distance at terrifying speed. Pilots choose targets in fractions of a second, hands steady on the controls, eyes locked through the gun sights. Then the sky erupts. Streams of tracer and metal tear forward as both sides slash through one another. For a brief, violent instant, Harrison and Moroka pass close enough to feel like two men staring across history. We already got 3. Break off in pairs. The Hellcats split apart. Harrison and his wingman twist away as 2 Zeros pour cannon fire after them. They are going right, comes the call, and Harrison reacts without hesitation. He dives to build speed, but the Japanese pilot stays with him, pressing hard and refusing to let go. Soon they are caught in a spiraling duel, each man trying to drag the other into the killing position. There is no room for panic now, only timing, nerve, and the thin line between control and disaster. Harrison watches his gauges, checks his airspeed, measures the altitude, and waits for the single moment that matters. Then he yanks the stick back, bleeding off speed as his Hellcat climbs sharply into the sky. The Japanese fighter follows him upward, hungry for the shot, believing the American has made himself vulnerable. Harrison's engine groans under the strain, and the force of the climb drives him hard into his seat. Rounds flash past the canopy as he crosses the Japanese pilot's nose, exposed for one brutal second. But Harrison holds steady. He keeps turning, watching the enemy fighter race beneath him too fast to recover. The Japanese plane stalls, flips over, and begins to fall. Gotcha. At the top of the climb, Harrison's Hellcat is almost out of flying speed, hanging for a breath on the edge. He hauls the stick, lets the weight of the engine pull the nose down, and drops back toward his target. The Zero fills his gun sight. Harrison squeezes the trigger. The Hellcat's guns hammer, and lines of lead rip through the Japanese fighter from nose to tail. Fire blossoms as fuel catches. The aircraft rolls onto its back, and a trail of black smoke follows it downward. Harrison eases the throttle, draws a breath, and scans the chaos of the dogfight spreading around him. Then a voice cracks through the radio. "Boss, I can't shake him. It is his wingman." 22-year-old Ensign Billy Hobbs. A Japanese fighter is fixed to Hobbs's tail, and Hobbs is throwing his Hellcat from side to side to stay alive. Tracer fire claws around him as he banks, slips, and dives, trying to make the enemy overshoot. Harrison slams his throttle forward and dives back into the fight, angling down onto the Japanese fighter. The enemy pilot never sees the Hellcat coming from above. Harrison steadies the sight, presses the trigger, and machine gun fire smashes into the Japanese plane. The fighter bursts apart, throwing fragments across the sky. "Thanks, boss," Hobbs says, shaken. "I thought I was a goner." "Keep your eyes peeled," Harrison answers. "Plenty more out there." And he is right. Elsewhere in the battle, Lieutenant Theodore Ted Hansen and Lieutenant Morris Murray Proctor are in trouble. 3 Imperial Japanese Army fighters are driving straight toward them, committed to a head-on attack. Hansen fires first, sending a heavy stream of machine gun rounds into the lead aircraft. The shots tear away part of the wing, and the Japanese fighter twists out of formation toward the ground. A second enemy opens fire, but his rounds streak high over Hansen's canopy and miss. Hansen corrects his aim and rakes the fighter's nose and fuselage, punching holes through the aircraft. But the third attacker is still coming, firing again and again with no sign of breaking away. Hansen has no clean shot left, so he rolls hard to the right and clears the line of fire. Behind him, Proctor is ready. As the Japanese plane flashes past, the opening appears. Proctor fires, cutting into the fighter, severing its wing and sending it plunging toward the earth. There is no time to enjoy the victory. The radio suddenly carries a desperate call from another fight nearby. "I can't take them." Lieutenant Joseph Satloff and Lieutenant Eugene Mandelberg are under heavy attack from a Japanese fighter. Their Hellcats are being hit again and again, the impacts rattling through the frames. Then Satloff sees a burst of flame, and Mandelberg's aircraft drops away burning. More rounds hammer Satloff's own plane as the Japanese pilot behind him stays locked on target. Inside the Raiden, the attacker is confident. He takes his time, certain the damaged American cannot escape. But he does not notice another pair of Hellcats descending to help. Proctor slides in behind the Japanese fighter and opens fire with a burst from his machine guns. The rounds slam home and the Japanese plane spins away, falling out of the fight. Proctor pulls alongside Satloff and sees at once how badly the Hellcat has been punished. The engine is coughing, the wings are torn, and the tail is peppered with holes. "Get out of here, Joe," Proctor tells him. "Head for the sea. I'll cover you." The 2 aircraft roll away from the battle zone. Satloff's propeller begins to falter. His nose drops, then falls faster, dragging the wounded Hellcat into a steep descent. Inside the cockpit, warning lights flash and instruments swing wildly as Satloff fights the controls. He wrestles with the stick, but the damaged surfaces no longer answer him. "Come on, bail out." The others watch his parachute open, low over the water, far too close to the surface. Then they see him hit the sea. "Note the position," Someone calls. He's on his own now. Bandits incoming. 6 Japanese army fighters are streaking toward them from the front, and the sky closes in again. The 2 pilots climb hard into the clouds, using the gray cover as their only shield against the fighters behind them. The cloud wall thickens around them, swallowing the battle until shapes vanish and voices become the only guide. Engines howl somewhere nearby, but through the mist, direction and distance turn uncertain in an instant. The Japanese fighters keep hunting, their silhouettes appearing and disappearing like shadows moving behind a curtain. There are too many of them, one pilot calls, his voice tight but controlled. I'll see you back on Yorktown. Then the formation breaks apart in the cloud, each man forced to trust his instincts and his machine. Beyond that same storm of combat, another pair of Hellcats is already trying to reach the coast. Harrison and Hobbs are pushing away from the fight, looking for open water and a path back to safety. For a moment, it seems as if they may slip clear, battered but alive, with the worst behind them. But the sky has not finished with them yet. Lieutenant Moroka bursts down from above, cutting out of the sun and cloud with terrifying precision. Behind him, his wingman hangs back, waiting for the moment when Harrison has no room left to move. It is the kind of ambush that leaves almost no warning and almost no choice. Harrison reacts as fast as he can, hauling on the stick, but the attack is already closing around him. Heavy cannon rounds slam into his Hellcat, and the whole aircraft shudders beneath him as metal tears through metal. Damn it. I'm hit, Harrison calls. Break off, Bill. Break off. But Hobbs does not turn away. Instead, he shoves his throttle forward and drives straight toward the attackers, trying to pull them off his leader. He fires at Moroka, but the shot is rushed, the angle wrong, and the bullets pass wide of the Japanese fighter. Moroka barely reacts. He stays locked on Harrison, patient, focused, and cold. Then he fires again. The cannon burst strikes the Hellcat squarely, and Harrison's aircraft erupts into smoke, flame, and falling wreckage. In an instant, the man who had led them through the fight is gone from the sky. Hobbs sees it happen, and grief turns instantly into rage. He dives after Moroka, narrowing his world to the Japanese ace in front of him and the gun sight ahead. He pulls the enemy fighter into line and squeezes the trigger, sending rounds into the Zero's wings. The hits land, but Moroka is skilled enough to break away before Hobbs can finish him. Hobbs is so fixed on revenge, he forgets the oldest warning in air combat. He does not check his 6. Moroka's wingman drops in behind him, closing the distance before Hobbs even understands the danger. Then the rounds hit. Shrapnel rips through the aircraft and tears into Hobbs's body as flames begin licking around the cockpit. The Hellcat is dying beneath him, and somehow, through pain and smoke, Hobbs knows he has to get out. Injured and fighting the slipstream, he forces the canopy open. Then he throws himself from the burning fighter and falls into the air below. His parachute opens, leaving him suspended for a few lonely seconds above the battlefield. Beneath him, his Hellcat tumbles downward, trailing fire like a torch dropped from the sky. Moroka and his wingman roar past and disappear toward home, returning to a future no one can read. But Billy Hobbs barely understands any of it now. His strength fades, the world blurs. Consciousness slips away before the ground can reach him. He is gone before he ever hits the earth. Elsewhere, Hansen breaks out of the cloud bank and into clearer sky. He scans every direction, searching for familiar shapes, contrails, flashes, anything that might be another Hellcat. But there is nothing. Only open sky, scattered cloud, and the wide, hard line of the sea below. Roger, Harrison, he calls. No answer. God damn it. Anyone? The silence that follows is heavier than the enemy fire had been. Hansen looks toward the ocean and begins plotting a course back to us as Yorktown, because there is nothing else to do. Then suddenly, a broken sound crackles in his headset. Damaged carrier. The words are faint, but they are enough. Hansen turns toward the carrier, pushing his wounded heart and his aircraft in the same direction. There may still be one more man alive, one more Hellcat fighting its way home. The deck of Yorktown comes into view, and Hansen lines up his approach with the careful discipline of a pilot on instinct. His Hellcat touches down on the carrier, catching the deck and rolling hard before finally slowing. The moment he climbs from the cockpit, he looks across the flight deck, then up into the sky. No other aircraft is in sight. For a terrible moment, he wonders if the voice he heard belonged to someone who has already gone into the sea. Then a shape appears in the distance. Another Hellcat. It is Proctor. His plane is badly damaged, scarred by bullets and held together by little more than skill and luck. Still, Proctor nurses it toward Yorktown, brings it in carefully, and manages to land. When the two men meet on the flight deck, there is no triumph in the reunion. There is only the shock of survival and the crushing knowledge of how many did not return. Hansen and Proctor are the only American pilots from the fight to make it back to the carrier. On the Japanese side, Moroka later claims the Americans had not simply turned away from Atsugi. He says they kept their rockets and fired them at the airfield after Japan had already surrendered. In his version, the attack that followed was not betrayal, but retaliation. Yet whatever explanation came afterward, the result could not be softened. On the same day peace was announced, the sky over Japan still filled with fire. 9 Japanese pilots and 4 American pilots were shot down in what became the last dogfight of the Second World War. The war had ended in words before it ended in the hearts of the men still flying through its final minutes. The final battle does not end with a clean victory, or with a moment anyone can celebrate without grief. It ends in scattered wreckage, empty seats, damaged aircraft, and men trying to understand what they have survived. For Hansen and Proctor, reaching Yorktown is not the same as coming home untouched. They have landed, yes, but the flight deck around them feels painfully quiet, as if the sky has taken too much. The men they left with only hours earlier are now missing. Wounded or gone forever. Harrison, the leader who turned his squadron away from a canceled strike, has disappeared in fire and smoke. Hobbs, who refused to abandon them, has fallen from the sky after one last desperate act of loyalty. Satloff has gone into the sea, alone beneath a parachute, with only his position marked by those who saw him fall. Manderberg has been lost in flames, another name claimed by a war that was supposed to have ended. And all of it happened after the words everyone had waited years to hear had already crossed the radio. The war is over. Those words should have stopped the killing instantly. But history is rarely that neat. Orders can be given in a single sentence, yet anger, shame, fear, duty, and revenge do not always obey so quickly. In those last minutes over Japan, the pilots on both sides were no longer fighting for strategy or territory. They were trapped inside everything the war had built inside them. For the Americans, the mission had changed in the space of one radio call, from attack to survival. One moment they were diving toward Atsugi Airfield with rockets armed, and the next they were turning home as victors. Their celebration was brief, bright, and human, the kind of release that comes when death suddenly steps back. But to Moroka, watching from the Japanese side, that same celebration looked like humiliation made visible. He saw the enemy turning away alive, and in that moment, surrender did not feel like peace. It felt like defeat that had to be answered before the sky went silent forever. That is what makes this final dogfight so tragic. The men involved were not shaping the outcome of the Second World War anymore. By then, the great decisions had already been made far above their rank and far beyond their cockpits. Yet for the pilots still in the air, the war remained close enough to touch. It was in the shaking of the stick, the snap of cannon fire, the smell of smoke, and the voice of a friend over the radio. Peace had arrived as an announcement, but not yet as a reality for the men caught between one order and the next. Later, Moroka would defend the attack by claiming the Americans had fired their rockets at Atsugi after surrender. In that telling, the Japanese assault became an answer to a violation, not a refusal to accept the end. But the surviving American account tells a very different story. For them, the strike was canceled, the rockets were jettisoned, and the turn home had already begun. Between those opposing memories sits the confusion of the last day of war. In battle, seconds blur, fear reshapes what people believe they saw, and survival often leaves behind more questions than certainty. What remains clear is the cost. 9 Japanese pilots were shot down that day, along with 4 American pilots, not during a decisive campaign, not in the opening fury of a major invasion, and not for a battle that could change the map. They died on August 15th, 1945, the same day the world was told the fighting was ending. That fact gives the story its bitter weight, because the last dogfight of the Second World War was not a grand closing scene filled with glory. It was a reminder that wars do not stop cleanly, just because leaders declare them finished. They end unevenly, painfully, with people still carrying orders, memories, wounds, and losses into the final silence. For the men who survived, victory must have felt complicated. They had lived long enough to hear that the war was over, only to watch friends die in the moments after. They returned to a carrier that should have been preparing for peace, carrying the news that the sky had not yet let go. For the families of those who did not return, the timing could only deepen the heartbreak. To lose someone in war is already unbearable. To lose them on the very day peace is announced is a different kind of cruelty. And yet this story also reveals something about courage that is easy to overlook. Harrison turned his men away when the order came, even though they had already prepared to strike. Hobbs charged toward danger to protect his leader, even when the smarter move was to break away. Proctor risked himself to save Satloff, then somehow brought his own damaged Hellcat back to the deck. Hansen kept flying, searching, calling, and hoping, even as the silence around him grew heavier. None of these choices could undo what happened, but they show the human side of combat beyond machines and tactics. Inside, every fighter was a man making decisions under impossible pressure, with only seconds to act. That is why the final dogfight still matters. It is not only a story about Hellcats, Zeros, Raidens, cannons, and machine guns. It is a story about how peace can arrive before people are ready to believe in it. It is about the dangerous space between an order ending a war and the emotions of those who have lived through it. And it is about the cost of even a few extra minutes of violence when the world is already turning toward silence. When the smoke finally cleared, the Second World War moved into history. But the losses of that morning remained personal. The names, the aircraft, the sea, the carrier deck, and the burning sky became part of one final, painful chapter. A chapter that reminds us that the end of a war is not just a date written in a book. It is a moment carried by the people who survived, and by the memory of those who almost made it home.